Welcome to another high octane episode of the podcast, the place to go for consultants, freelancers, and contractors to pick up tips about how to improve their business, not to cock up their business, and essentially just to listen to three bearded blokes waffle on for a little bit as well. Hopefully, you'll take away something from it. That's the aim for every episode. This week, as usual, we've got Mark McLean, business lawyer, myself, financial advisor, and Alan Broom, accountant, and I'm sure you'll soon find out a bit more, but published author. As we go into this week's main topic, which is going to be taking on employee number one, the main things really that you need to know about and to make sure that you get right before you take that plunge. So, before we get into the meat and bones, I would say how you're doing and what you've been up to, chaps, but we're back to back this one, so I only saw you 5 minutes ago.
Since we last spoke, I've been to Greg's and got a egg and cress sandwich and cheese and onion pasty. That's been my week.
Do you know, it's the way you ram your rock and roll lifestyle down our face that really is disgusting.
I'm not too jealous about it, but
I'm not. Well, I was serenaded earlier by Mark as I came through with my jacket potato. He played me a beautiful song. I may have to threaten that it gets released because I did hit record before he stopped singing.
Open as when I was at Greg's. A couple of my staff have already resigned and disgusted at the noises that were coming out of my office, so I don't know what was going on there, lads.
It was called Chris's Soggy Bottom, but it was about his jacket potato, nothing else.
Your Honour.
I promise.
Well, look, let's jump straight into it because I think this is going to be a meaty episode. But before we do, everyone's on the edge of their seat, Alan. What's been bugging you?
In the last week. I was just want to have I think it might be a good time for Mark to mute his speakers because I'm going to have I'm going to go into lateness. I know it's something that really winds you up, Chris, but I mean it's a way of life for Mark, so he's not going to get involved here. In business as in life, I despise lateness. It drives me up the wall. I don't know what it is. Is it a power play, Mark? It might be an idea that Mark being here, he could present the case for the defence. I don't know, but is it? I mean, is it? What is it, Mark? Is it disrespect? Is it disorganisation? Is it a power play? Is it? I don't know. What is it? I mean, it's got to be. It has to be stamped out. It's inexcusable in my mind.
No, I can't speak for the laters, the late community.
The late community.
I think that there's the late community. There's many reasons why people may not be able to adhere to society's overly structured timescales. But one of them, from my perspective, is I am just it is hard being a lawyer and a rock star at the same time. It really is hard
you, though?
To keep on top of everything.
But what about you?
Sorry?
Never mind the lawyer and the rock star. What about you? Here's the thing.
What about before you found global rockstar fame? Were you on time before that you made it big time?
Popped out with a guitar in my hand, mate. That was the start of it. A guitar in one of those barrister's wigs.
Here's the thing that...
What to say to that?
I've completely diffused Alan's anger. I'm sorry, Alan.
Just keep it under wraps. Here's the thing that you've got to know. You know you like music, Mark, but do you like stand-up comedy? You're a big comedy fan. No, really?
I wonder where this is going. No, yeah. I mean, it depends who
right.
it is. But
you know Mike Birbiglia, the US stand-up? Right.
Possibly. He's not ringing a bell, but possibly I've seen something.
The next time you're on YouTube, just search for Mike Birbiglia people. Then maybe you'll understand how we feel.
Get an insight into the other side.
How people feel about late people. And maybe you maybe get a wee peek behind the
Okay.
curtain or under the bonnet. You maybe understand why it is that I'm just going to say it. Why it is that we hate you.
Yeah, to put it lightly, one of my the best man at my wedding. He's been knowing me since we were, I'd say, about 4, 5. He met me whilst I was trying to cut down a tree with a rope, and in the best man speech at the wedding, there was a moment where he said, "As all of us who know you dearly, Mark, we just all want, we feel strongly about you, we love you, we care for you, but we're all thinking the same thing. Why are you like this, and how do we make it stop?"
Is that just your character in general? No lightness, just everything.
It could well be. It could well be a more generalised statement.
We don't want it to stop. We just want it to start earlier.
Yeah, yeah. Fair enough.
It's not hard. You've just got to turn up.
You got me?
Anyway.
But no, we're talking about employee number one. So when you've got to that point where you can't do everything on your own, you need to take someone on to help you out so you can keep growing things. Where do you start? And here he is, waggling his... Is it a bestseller yet, Alan? I don't know if it's made the Times list, has it? What's the numbers like?
Bestseller in the category of books called Employee Number One by Alan.
There we have it. And has anyone purchased it who doesn't have the surname Broom?
The reality is I could read the book. It turned out not to be quite as popular as I thought it was going to be. Let me just say that. I don't know if I've made a arse of it, but it's a cracking read. Like it's primo. But I think
I did read it. It is a good read, and the fact that you've done it, I think, is admirable because there's some gold in there. There really is.
For that sounded a wee bit condescending, but we'll let it pass.
You did a really good job. Well done, Alan.
Well done, Bruni. Well done.
I feel like I'm going to get a participation medal at the end of the season. Within reason, I expected it to be. It's an important topic, right? There's a lot of things in it that's important. So I put it on general release for, I think it was $12.99 or something. And I think it's 5 maybe we sold. So I'm not going to be retiring on my residuals. Put it that way. So basically, we had to revert to our tried and tested giving information away for free model. So a lot more people have got it now, but I ain't getting any. I've not had any income from it as of yet. But it's an important thing. It's an important piece of literature that should be taken seriously.
Up there with Shakespeare, and
I like to think so.
I heard it's GCSE syllabus for 2 years' time.
Listen, guys, it's not for me to comment on that thing. The nation will make their own minds up, sort of thing. We'll find it. But anyway, first thing that you've got to consider, which was a bit of a surprise to me, although it should be fairly obvious, is to make sure that your prospective employee has got the right to work here. And I'm not talking about if they're on the dole or if they're claiming whatever benefits that means that they're not entitled to work or they shouldn't work. I'm talking about the strict right to work. Basically making background checks to make sure that they can work. Generally speaking, if they're UK or Ireland nationals, there isn't really an awful lot of issues. Basically you've just got to get their passport, or if they've not got a passport, get a copy of their birth certificate or adoption certificate or anything along those lines, and something for HMRC or an official UK agency that's got their name on it and their national insurance number on it. Generally speaking, that's all you need. They're overseas citizens, so a wee bit more complicated. The prospective employee, or the candidate, I suppose you would want to call them, has to go to gov.uk to prove their right to work. They need to go with certain bits of information. I can't remember exactly, but one is a biometric permit card or residency card or national identity card and what have you, and then they generate their own right to work, and that generates a share code, which hard to believe that share code is then shared with the employer, and then the employer goes to another place, puts in another site on the gov.uk website, puts in that share code, and that generates a confirmation, I guess you would call it, to say that you have got the right to work, and then they've got the right to work, so you can crack on for there.
So what happens then if you're blissfully unaware, you've taken someone on? Because I didn't know all this was a thing. So what's the punishment, the penalty if you get caught having employed someone who doesn't have a right to work?
So it's basically, it's unlawful to employ someone in the UK who doesn't have a right to work here, and it can be quite serious, actually. So you can be sent to jail for up to 5 years, and there's an unlimited fine, I believe. But you have to be found guilty of employing someone who you knew or had reasonable cause to believe did not have the right to work in the UK. So, without going into, any detail on that, I suppose an example might be if you had, a reason to believe that the papers were incorrect, or, they weren't allowed to do some certain types of work or something like that. But I think the key is that you have to kind of have a little bit of a trigger before it's an issue.
So it's like most things in business, and when HMRC or the government are involved, make sure you follow the process. Seek advice, ask somebody, just don't blindly jump in.
No idea that you employ someone the wrong way. You need soap on a rope.
Crazy. I know. Be careful, man.
Yep.
I don't imagine that. I would be surprised if anybody's ever been sent down for that, but you never know.
Yep.
Right, come on in. What else you got?
So, we'll go back to the key rights and entitlements again then. So once you've determined that your candidate, your prospective employee, is entitled to work here and work in the UK, then being an employee in the UK brings a fair amount of key rights and entitlements. A lot of these have been in the news recently with the Labour government getting into power, and obviously the Labour government are very much in support of the worker and want to batten down the workers' rights. But there's a lot of legislation and rights that have already been enshrined in that legislation. You'll have heard people talk about day one rights. So what we're going to talk about is the rights as they are at the moment, but the day one rights essentially that are coming into play. Or are they being proposed, or are they still to get royal assent, or what have you? Is going to mean that these rights apply from day one, isn't that right?
Yeah, they're still in the works at the moment.
Right. But Mark, maybe you can you run through the kind of key rights an employee when they start?
It depends what you look. There's a lot of them, so it really depends on what you're looking for, I suppose. Right. But I can list some of the key ones here. So they'll have a right to, obviously, written particulars of employment. So this is the Section 1 statement that probably everyone's heard of, which sets out your minimum terms, and that has to be in writing. Obviously, they get rights to statutory sick pay, protection against unlawful deduction from wages. And then, of course, you've got the other issues about, this is the big thing about day one rights, about termination and when you can dismiss someone. So at the moment, if you've worked somewhere for a year, then you get rights not to be dismissed without notice. And then, not the rights not to be wrongfully terminated is how they term it. And then after 2 years, you get rights not to be unfairly dismissed. So unfair dismissal here is the big thing that everyone's been talking about with the changes. Because if that's available from day one, then there's obviously going to have to be a lot more procedures and so on before you can fairly dismiss an employee and not risk facing a claim in the employment tribunal.
So that covers a couple of the key points. I mean, obviously, you've got the national minimum wage and the national living wage that needs to be adhered to. 44 per hour for 21 and over, is that the right amount? I think it is. Sounds about right.
What's the difference between the two then? Is one voluntary and one not?
Yeah.
So I remember
wage is legal. I think that the point is that the employers are working towards the living wage. if that
That's
makes
your
sense.
sort of target. You know, ideally, you want
Yeah.
to be able to claim that you're a living wage paying employer, but your minimums, as it
I've
says,
kind
the
of
minimum.
failed to understand it, because you've got to, if it's a minimum wage, it's a minimum wage. If it's a living wage, that would suggest something different to me, you know. But national living wage is basically a national
Well, I think
for national minimum wage for 21 and above, which is at £11.44. You know,
yeah, I think the different things, but depending on age,
that's
as
essentially
far
it.
as my understanding
That's
goes.
essentially it. So, in addition to that,
Yeah. So minimum wage is everyone.
once you've decided how much you're going to,
Sorry, Alan, go on.
Once you've decided how much you're going to pay them, you've then got to bring into the paperwork, which Mark will go into discuss in a minute, certain things. So you've got minimum rights to 5.6 weeks annual leave, which is equivalent to 28 days for a full-time worker. You've got the working time regulations, or is it working time directive? I can't remember the exact name, which limits the number of weeks, number of hours you can work to 48. And then there's all sorts of different rules in terms of rest periods and stuff, which need to be taken into account. As Mark mentioned earlier, they've got statutory sick pay rights, you've got maternity, paternity and shared paternal leave rights that give you certain amounts of paid or unpaid statutory pay, etc., when you've got to take time off. You've obviously got protection against discrimination. You've got a right to request flexible working arrangements, but I mean, it can be kind of ignored anyway if you didn't want to accept it. Notice periods.
You can ask. Yeah, see where it gets you.
Is there a statutory minimum in notice period, Mark?
Yeah, so it's 1 week for every year you've worked, typically.
Up to so long though.
I think it's up to a maximum of
Right.
12.
So if you've worked for somebody for 50 years, you've not got to give them.
Yeah, exactly.
year's
Yeah.
And then obviously you've got to take into account pensions and auto enrolment, which again we'll go on to talk about. Health and safety, which we won't go on to talk about. You got whistleblower protections, you got time off for public duties. So if you've got to serve on a jury, or I think acting as a magistrate's another one, and then you've got a right to take reasonable time off for emergencies. But I mean, those are a lot of the time they're rights and entitlements, but they're generally speaking they're things that any reasonable employer wouldn't think twice about anyway. You know, there's a couple of them. Speaking as an employer myself, there's a couple of them that I can find quite irritating. None of them are especially onerous, except jury duty. I find that a bit bugging myself. Like, it is what it is. You can't really do much about it. Right. So paperwork, Mark. When you start employing somebody, there's lots of paperwork. From the top of my memory, you've got your SMT1 in it, Statement of Main Terms. You've got your offer letter, which obviously needs to enshrine everything that's in it. You've got the SMT1, and then you've got all sorts of other.
We just want to translate SMT1 for simple people like me.
Statement of Main Terms of Employment.
What's that mean? That's not your contract.
So, yeah, yes and no. And no. So it's typically we can call it that.
And let Mark talk through the paperwork.
So so you got your Section 1 statement, which is basically the government set out some rules as to the minimum that needs to be given to an employee in writing before they start the job. There's other things that you can give a couple of months later, but typically I would always say it's best to just get everything in the statement. So what is good practice is to get those minimum terms, put them in writing in your employment contract, and then you can flash out all the other terms that you want as well. So it's pretty good practice to get a written contract to your employee before they start. Make sure they sign it, they're happy with it before the start date. Loads of employers fail on this, particularly bars, pubs and stuff who employ people and never ever give them that Section 1 statement with the written particulars in. You can so employees can get compensation for that, if you fail to give them the written particulars under Section 1, they can claim, I think if I remember, we're looking at between 2 and 4 weeks pay. So it isn't huge.
What is it? Just a glorified job description?
Yeah, basically, yeah. I mean, in fact, as a little tip, the government has, if you type in Section 1 statement, government advice, the government have put a full list of what you need to include online. There's not really an excuse not to do it. It's really easy. But it is kind of a glorified place of work, hours of work, pay, those kind of things. But you also do still need to set out some more nuanced things like holiday pay, sick pay, those kind of things. So yeah, it's my recommendation is go and have a look online and see what that says. But the best practice is to get a contract with it all in, I would say. So then, obviously, you send out your contract. With that, your offer letter explaining the terms of the offer. You'll also ideally want to send out your employee handbook as well, which will contain all the policies and procedures. That's a huge topic in itself. Maybe we can touch on that in another episode.
Odds of a one-man operation having an employee handbook is going to be pretty slim, I would imagine.
Well, yes, but do remember that. You don't have to contain all this in the handbook necessarily, but when it comes to unfair dismissal, you still need to follow ACAS guidance, and a good way to do that is to say, well, we've followed our policies, which we based on the ACAS guidance. We've gone through a disciplinary procedure, etc., etc. So it's useful to have at least something in writing, even if it's a one-page policy saying disciplinary and grievance procedure. So obviously, then you want forms for completion in relation to the personal info, like contact details, banking info, for payment of salary, emergency contact information, all that kind of stuff. And then of course, this is more of the financial stuff, but you'll want certain, requests for documents, so P45, P60, all of that kind of stuff, student loan repayments. And then obviously information in relation to pension and benefits, all that kind of stuff. You want to be clear on that from the outset. You're going to want to get from them evidence of their qualifications, obviously. So you need to start a personnel file pretty early on so that you can file all this away and make sure that you've got it if it's relevant. And then probably, information in relation to your induction or your training program, what to expect on day one, where to go, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the overview, but from a financial perspective, possibly, Alan, you may want to flesh those points out about what documents you're going to have to pull together or at least get from the new employee.
Aye.
Can I just ask before you jump into that, if it's all right?
Yeah.
One quickie. I know we've got loads of topics to get through, but this question comes up all the time. The amount of people that I speak with, and they're like, I've never had a contract, I've never signed nothing, I haven't got a contract.
Mm.
I mean, what are you leaving yourself open to? Is there some sort of implied basic minimum contract that exists if you've not written it down, or?
So are you talking about from the
the business? Are they leaving themselves exposed? And what's the big thing that they're potentially storing up as a problem in the future if they're not doing that? Because it's me mate, I know him, and it'll be fine.
Yes. So one of the points we touched on earlier, unless you've edited it out, is the Section 1 statement. So if you haven't given the written particulars, then you might be exposing yourself to a claim. It's not a huge one, but it's a hassle. The other point that you've correctly pointed out is implied terms. Obviously, the Employment Rights Act in any relationship of employment will imply these rights that we were talking about. Alan's mentioned some, I've mentioned some. You can't get away from them. So in any contract, they're implied anyway. So it's not like it's a situation where they're going to be there, but you can tailor some of them and you can modify them and make them more favourable to you. And so the key really is just certainty. If you don't have written terms, you don't have a written contract, it's, the employee might be arguing terms that are not favourable to you. And because you're relying on oral evidence, you're in a really tricky position.
Sorry, chaps. Carry on.
No,
thank you, Mark.
Where were we?
We're talking about the financial documents that you might need to prepare, and secondly, that you might want to ask for from the employer.
Right, so that covers what? Where are we? What about insurance? Do we need to talk about the insurance, right? So that was drafting the documents, right? So, right, I'll just roll on again then. So once you have established that you've got an employee that's got the right to work and you've provided them with the documents, certificate, the contracts are signed and what have you, then you're ready to go. There are certain things that you need to do in terms of staying compliant with HMRC and the various government agencies that you've got to look after. You want to be, first off, you want to be certain that you're insured to have an employee. As you would probably imagine, it's called employer's liability insurance. There are statutory minimums that you have to carry in terms of insurance, but I can't remember what they are. I think is it 5 million. Mark, can you remember off the top of your head? I mean, it's probably something that you're more likely to know than me, but is it 5 million quid employee liability cover? Doesn't matter. It's not hugely important. It costs buttons anyway. It doesn't cost much at all. That's the only legal requirement that you've got in terms of insurance, unless they're driving a van, for example. All right, cool. I mean, other than an employer's liability insurance, the only issue that you might have in terms of insurance is making sure that they're insured to drive company vehicles and things like that, if that's appropriate. But the insurance aspect is small but important, I think, is fair to say. But once you've done that, you then need to go through. This is only for employee number one, by the way. Once you've done this part once, it's there. You need to set up as an employee. Beg your pardon. You need to set up as an employer with HMRC. Now, as a veteran of dealing with HMRC, I can tell you that it's a right old bollock doing anything with them at the moment. But to be fair, setting up as an employer isn't too bad. There's an online process that you need to do, that you need to follow out, and you need to do this as soon as you become an employer that's paying an employee above the national insurance lower earnings limit, or if you've got company benefits like car insurance or health insurance, you've got to register. But basically, I suppose, in short, as soon as you're paying anything that's close to a salary, you know what I mean, rather than kind of pocket money, you need to register. HMRC want you to register before the first payday, but no more than 2 months in advance. So you've got to get the timing right. So you didn't want to be involved with HMRC too soon, because then you'll not be using them, and then it can be a bit of pain in the backside to organise that. And if you're too late, then obviously HMRC are not going to be very pleased. And as we've kind of discussed, HMRC like to raise penalties for everything. I think there might be a penalty for this, but I can't remember. The registration process itself is all done online. I think you just go to the HMRC website, fill out the employer registration form. So it's that simple. Obviously, you need certain things on hand, like your company name and address and national insurance number, company number. If you're a sole trader, they'll want your personal details as well. And then the next thing you need to look at is setting up a payroll system, like selecting software, basically. We believe that there's lots and lots of software companies kicking about offering these services. Us personally, we've filtered it down to Free Agent and Xero, as we all know, or as probably most of you know. We're a Free Agent first firm at Acumenica, and then Xero is good for a wee bit more complex situations. Once you've done that, all you've really got to do is gather the employee details and get them on the system. So you're going to collect all the essential information from the employees, their name, address, date of birth, etc., etc. A lot of that will be on the employee, I guess, checklist that you have. And on top of that, you need the P45. I think we mentioned that earlier. And then you're away. You've got a system in place. And once first payroll comes along, you enter in their gross pay. And if you've set it up all correctly, all the deductions will come off. and then that tell you what your net amount is. You pay them the net amount. The balance is, generally speaking, what goes to HMRC, and again, your software is going to calculate that for you. You got to, and then of course, on top of the tax, you've then got auto enrolment, workplace pensions. Probably the biggest pain in the backside for anybody who's starting a single person. You know, if you've only got one person working for you that's eligible, this is where it gets kind of ridiculous. Workplace pensions, as you know, are an opt-out situation, so you're automatically enrolled into them, hence the name auto-enrolment. But even if you only have one employee, and if that employee has expressly told you that they don't want to be involved in an auto-enrolment situation, they didn't want to be making pension contributions, that having been said, it would be it seems like a ridiculous thing to opt out of a pension when your employer's make a contribution similar to what you're making, but that's besides the point. Even if you don't have any employees who want to contribute to the pension, you've still got to have a pension scheme in place. So you still have to set the pension up and everything, which is a ball ache, of course it is, but you've still got to do it. So that's worthwhile looking at.
You've still got to put them in, don't you? And they've got to opt out. You can't just say, you don't want to be in, I'll not bother putting you in. You still got to go through the whole rigmarole.
Yeah, basically that's it.
Sorry to cut across, but just wondering, what if your only employee is you in your limited company? What kind of approach would you adopt to it then?
But you don't need to do it. If the only employee is the director, you don't need to do it. It's actual proper employees, if you like, that this is concerned with. So you don't need to worry about that.
Yeah,
which is good. Right, where was I before Mark cut across me?
It's not cheap, is it? Well, the one thing that it's not just the admin hassle, is it? It's the extra cost. Because you're looking at an extra minimum
3% contribution from the employer. So if you're employing somebody, well, the first 6,240 quid is your qualifying amount. So if you employ somebody that earns above 6,000 to 50,000, that amount in between 3% you can add on. So if you're on 26 grand a year, or if you're employing somebody on 26 grand, first 6,240, that's the qualifying thing. Call it 20 grand, 3% of that, 3% of 20 grand is 600 quid. So add that onto the employment costs. So basically, once you've employed somebody, you automatically enrol them into the pension scheme. You've then got to notify them of that. So again, more paperwork that you've got to follow, and then you've got to declare compliance with the pensions regulator. So you've got to tell them, I think it's within 5 months, that you're being compliant. Although why you've got to do that, I don't know. And then you've got your ongoing duties to ensure that the contributions are being made, and that every 3 years each employee who's opted out you've got to go through the re-enrollment process and make sure they're still eligible, and then you've got your record keeping. Basically, your payroll software would normally keep the records anyway, you know what I mean? But it's got to be done anyway, and you've got to stay informed and keep informed about things like that, you know. So all sorts of things that you've got to worry about when you take on your first employee.
What about pensions, Chris? Is there anything? This is kind of your wheelhouse. Is there anything else that you think is important to consider or observe when you're taking on employees vis-a-vis pensions?
If I'm honest, from the employer's point of view, the point that Alan's made, which is that if it's employee number one, you're most likely looking for the lowest friction solution, where you can just get the box ticked and get them in there. I don't think for employee number one you're going to mess around going to try and get them a all bells and whistles, Clem Fandango pension scheme, because every other life insurance company who offers them is going to look at you and go, one member of staff, you can take a hike, mate. And if you try and use, let's say someone comes to you, just one person, they say, I've already got a pension, can you not just stick it in my pension that I've already got? Well, the problem you've got is that pension needs to be auto-enrolment compliant. And if it's just an old one or if it's a SIP, there's certain charges and, it needs to have the functionality to be able to auto-enroll you back in every few years. And most pensions can't tick all the boxes that they need you to. So honestly, I'd probably say just keep it simple for the first one.
Yes, a kind of fair middle ground, isn't it? I mean, it's not great, but in terms of the admin side of things, well, it's still no flawless by any means or frictionless by any means. It's less friction rather than frictionless, The good thing, mind, is that there's technology that can help you, really help you filter through or batter through the admin side of things. And if you really don't want to do it, and a lot of people at this level really don't want to do it, then all this work can be easily outsourced to people such as myself in terms of such as Acumenica. Really, I'm not going to do it in terms of the payroll admin and so on and so forth. And the contracts and stuff can be done. Again, we can do that using trusted legal partners. Is that right, Mark?
Yes, that is right, Alan.
So,
a nice plug there.
I'm going to forget that anything that you don't want to do in this respect can be outsourced. So don't forget. I mean, you've got to do a cost benefit analysis. Make sure that the time that you're saving is worth the charges that is going to be set your way for it. But I still think it's a good idea to at least consider outsourcing it, if not for the time benefit, also to ensure like peace of mind benefit. That the compliance has been taken care of properly. Because as we kind of touched on at the beginning, a lot of the time you can be kind of blindly blindly going about your business correctly, but it turns out that you're doing a few things wrong. So it's worthwhile, if not necessarily outsourced, but certainly seeking advice to make sure you're doing the right thing if you're doing it yourself.
Exactly, and it's obviously the savings are a big part of it, but it's also the opportunity not to get stung with fines or penalties, or like we were talking earlier, do not pass go, do not collect £200 straight to prison. Those are the things that you're avoiding. Those are the risks you're tackling. And another point, Alan, is it probably worth on this episode mentioning that you are offering a day one employee sort of bundle?
Mm-hmm. Yep, we are, but I'm far too modest or humble to talk about that on the podcast. I mean, we're here to give free information and advice. Anybody wants to look for it, they can find it. Let's put it that way. But here's a question.
Okay, that's
for
fair.
You two guys, because I do this all the time. I'll be aware of it, but I want to ask you a question. If you employ somebody at 15 quid an hour, how much so you're offering them an hourly rate of £15 an hour? What do you reckon the actual hourly cost is?
Oh, here we go. I was just wondering this, and then you've asked it. If I had to have
you've read employee number one, haven't you?
Stab in
Have
the
you read
dark.
employee number one, Chris?
I've read.
Yeah.
I haven't revised it. Jesus.
I said at the very beginning that you've read it. If you'd read the book, you would know this. It's in the last page.
Let's say 18 quid an hour.
From 15 quid, you say 18. Mark, what do you reckon?
Aye.
I am. You guys are the numbers guys. I'm the words guy. So this is an absolute stab in the dark. And just to be controversial, I won't pick a similar figure. I'll go over. I'll go wild at £21.
The actual amount is £19.54.
Jesus. I mean, I've definitely read it.
We're exaggerating it for comic effect, I suspect.
Yeah.
15 quid is your offered hourly rate. On top of that, the very first thing you've got to add on is employer's national insurance, right? It's 13% of the gross adjusted for the exempt amounts and what have you. So at 15 quid, basically what's it at 10%. So it's £1.50. Your pension contributions are 75 pence. So that takes the base payroll cost, if you like, £17.25. So that is for 35 hours or what have you per week. But you've got to annualise this cost because there are certain things that you've got to take into consideration. You've got 5.6 weeks of holiday pay that you need to bring in. So if you take that into each hour, it's £1.85 at 15 quid an hour. And then you've got your sick pay. All right, you didn't necessarily pay sick pay, but there's a sick pay cost. We've calculated that at 45p per hour, which takes it up to £19.54. So that's no a huge amount, but it's much more than we expected, or that Chris expected. So it's actually it's about a third again. It's about 30% again. So your basic rate plus 30%. So if you're making why it's important is if you're making calculations of your costs, say you're charging this guy out or this person out, and you want to be charging them at 3x their cost, there's a huge difference between charging them at 45 quid an hour, which would be 3 times 15, to £58, £58.62 an hour, which would be 3 times £19.54. Without a calculator, that might be wrong. So that's why it's hugely important to understand that there's hidden costs as well as quite obvious costs. And don't forget, in addition to these costs, you then might have to factor in additional insurance costs. Unlikely, as we spoke about, the insurance isn't a great deal. You'll have to factor in maybe additional desk space or office space, but again, that's less relevant at the moment. You would have to factor in tech, like IT equipment, a phone, etc., etc. So there's all sorts of costs that you've got to
licenses.
Exactly, user licenses and stuff for software. So there's all sorts of things that you've got to factor in, which is why you need professional assistance a lot of the time.
Yeah. That surprised me. That figure surprised me, to be honest with you. It re-surprised me because I had read employee number one and forgot it, and it re-surprised me.
I'd forgotten it. I'd gone in my head. I'd gone my national insurance, pension contribute. I hadn't even factored in the other bits, which it's a fair old whack, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that's why.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, look, fellas, I think we've absolutely smashed that one. There's not much left to cover, I would say. And we've been going for a while, so I think so it was a good one. Some good stuff in there. But let's wrap it up for today. I think we're done. As always, we're now at a point where we've got the first few records in the bag and we need some questions from you lot, listener, however many we've got by this point. Ideas for shows. If there's something that you want us to cover in detail, you've got carte blanche, send it in and we'll do our best. If you do have a question or a topic you want us to cover, the email address is pod@bwbtb.co.uk. I think I got that.
It stands for Blokes with Beards Talking Business, so think about that when you're typing it and you'll get the letters.
Yeah. Well done, Mark. And next, what do we think's next up? What do you fancy for the next one?
I have no idea. We've got a list of things that we can talk about, possible topics, haven't we? Some really good ones on here.
Probably someone good.
How about what happens if you can't work? So thinking about sickness or stuff like that, because you're the business here. So how do we cover for that? Let's do that one.
Good. Yeah, that sounds good.
Lovely. Right. Well, okay. Well, if you can remain on the edge of your seat until then, we'll be back in a couple of weeks' time. Till then, bienvenue.
Adios.
Ciao.
Bienvenue means welcome.
It's not as crispy as it should be. I tried to make it crispy, but all I got was a big soggy bottom.
All right.
Chris Thompson doing dishes. Making lunch, making lunch.
Yeah.
He's making lunch. He's making lunch, but it's not as crispy as it should be.